really good to have so many people here today, and welcome. I'm Justine from the Council for Learning Outside the Classroom, and we have this a series of webinars which we started in July as a way to share best practice. People were feeling a bit isolated at that time, and things were changing quite rapidly. So we started this series, and it went really well. And the purpose is to just show you what other people are doing. We're not telling you what to do. There's no right or wrong way, but it's just people saying what they've experienced, how they've adapted, activities they've tried, and things that help you in your work and in what you're doing. So today we're really pleased to be joined by Jim Langley from Nature's Work. Jim has published a range of learning resources. He's got really experienced in this sector, and he's going to be sharing examples of the activities that he does with groups, so you can get some ideas, hopefully use in your learning. And what we'll do, because you probably have questions, if you can pop them into, if you look at the bottom of the screen, that there's chat function. If you put your questions in there as they come to you, rather than trying to hang on to them to the end of the session, you put your questions in there, and then I'll read them out to Jim at the end of the session, if that's okay. But that will keep, it will mean that I'm not searching for someone waving their arm around or anything. So yeah, any comments or questions, put them in there. If you have any problems with tech, just pop it in there as well, and either Emily or I will pick it up while Jim's talking. So just pop everything into the chat function, and Emily and I will keep an eye on this. We are recording the session, so you don't have to take notes as we're going along. You can just sit back and listen to Jim. But it's also available for you afterwards to reflect on it, and if you want to share it with a colleague. And yes, I think that's everything. If you have any problems, I'd say pop it into chat. But otherwise, I think we'll kick off. So over to you, Jim.
Hello. I'm just going to share my screen there. Hopefully that should be up and sharing with you all now. So it's a presentation I've put together. It should take about half an hour, and within it there's 10 different activities which I've used, and I do at various events I work on or with groups themselves. So yeah, well, it's very much a pleasure to be invited to speak here this afternoon. Shame I couldn't present a workshop at the conference, but this is a virtual version of some of the ideas that I would have shown back in November. So I run an educational consultancy called Nature's Work, and I provide training workshops and events, and also teach field studies and other outdoor learning opportunities with schools. And I've been teaching the outdoors for about 24 years, and a range of employers from the Field Studies Council, and I'm a STEM ambassador, an IOL member, and yeah, so I've got a breadth of experience of teaching science through the outdoors. And today I just want to share some of these ideas with you that hopefully will inspire you to either use as they are, or to adapt and think about how you may be able to use them in your practice within your school grounds. So we're going to illustrate some practical activities that are carried out in your locality, provide curriculum-linked learning ideas for use beyond the classroom, and to demonstrate how learning can develop young people's understanding, skills, personal and social development. But first, I like to use things called, I like to encourage pupils to think and to stimulate their curiosity. And thinking routines are a great way of setting a scene. So I'd like you to try this. It's virtual world now, so we'll just run through it as an example. This one's called a See, Think, Wonder. So I'm going to show you a photo, and I would like you to just think about what you see in that image, and then what you think is going on in that image, and then what you wonder about it. So it's a really good way of setting the scene. I use it regularly. So in this image here, what do you see? So just jot your notes down, or just keep a record of that. Things that I would pick out from there would be, there's a rope in action. there's people, there's an activity going on. I see a playground, I see clouds, I see shadows, I see people are involved. Now, what do you think about that image? What do you think's going on? What do you think about that view? You may think it looks fun. You may think it's quite early morning, we've got long shadows. You may think it's autumn, you can see the trees turning colour in the background. You may think it's cold or cool. And then finally, what do you wonder about that image? What do you wonder, putting yourself in the situation there? You wonder what type of game is going on, what they're playing, what are the outcomes of that game, or maybe even wonder why they're doing it. Or you may even wonder if you would enjoy it yourself. So bringing you into the picture and engaging you with what's going on. And essentially that's what I think outdoor learning is all about. It's that engagement with it. So today what I thought I would do is produce some activities which are related to a topic. So that topic is light and shadow. Linking with the curriculum, I won't spend too long on this, but if we think about light and shadow, how can we link it to aspects of mathematics? Well, we can take measurements, we can gather and record and present data, record our findings with diagrams and tables. We can look at fractions, ratios, angles, we can tell the time, shapes and patterns, linking it with English. We use descriptive terms and words, using vocabulary, written skills, communicating. Also groups would be interacting, listening, speaking skills there, imaginative, creative writing we can bring out of it. There's a lot of science we can do in the outdoors, scientific methods and processes, developing skills, the route to inquiry, for instance, developing observational skills like we just demonstrated, linking maybe plants and photosynthesis, living things, organisms and adaptations, the physics of light and reflection, refraction, absorption, different materials and so on. So we can go through geography, developing geographical skills, fieldwork techniques again, understanding the environment, climate, art and design, designing products, developing techniques and colour and textures. So there's a whole host of things we can do with art. History, we can look at how light has influenced the way we live and have changed the way we live. People have been involved with the development of lights and lighting. Music, we can bring that in through suggestions of light and darkness, echoes and changing day and night and how sound changes. With religion, we can bring in the impact of light, Christmas and festivals and the darkness and symbolism, a lot of physical education, and also their PSHE, so developing self-confidence and learning about themselves and experiences, and just the physical taking part of an activity. So the first activity, now we'll get down to the nitty gritty. First activity, very simple. If we have a sundial, what will be the learning objectives of creating a sundial in the grounds? Well, we can recognise that shadows are formed when light from a light source is blocked by an opaque object. To understand that light travels in straight lines, to create a natural sundial, and to be able to link it with telling the time. Very basic equipment. You have a piece of wood, or you could use a broom and prop up a broom. You can, if you're on playground, you could use chalk. If you're on grass, you could use stones. Use of a compass would be useful, and then pen and paper to record your measurements. So the activity, very straightforward. You'd angle a piece of wood pointing north. So again, learning about orientation and angle and where the shadow would lie. Marking position of the shadow, recording the time, measuring the length of the shadow, repeating this at intervals throughout the week, possibly just throughout the day, or maybe you could develop it into a year-long study so you could have a permanent sundial. So looking at compass cardinals, the idea of a permanent sun clock in the school grounds. In the day, you could take time-lapse photography and look at the shadows through the day, so you could show that incremental change. Recording temperatures in daylight or in the shade. Just health and safety, sun's very dangerous, never to look into it directly. There's the image of writing out the cardinals on the playground and looking at shadows there. So in terms of linking that with the curriculum, with maths, we're telling the time, we're estimating, we're measuring lengths, recording results down, investigating angles, and then we can graphically show our results. Through science, we've got the principles of light traveling straight lines. It cannot pass through some objects. We're using measuring equipment. We can look at plant adaptations to shade, animal adaptations to kind of cold as well, or they're hunting at night using night vision, patterns of seasonal migration. With geography, Earth's rotation, the seasons, using orientation. Literacy, we're looking at how light and darkness is used through stories. We could write poems about nocturnal animals. With history, we could look at the history of the light bulb, even go back as far as how light was important in historic monuments, and like the light casting shadows across, say, Stonehenge, for instance. And then with religion, we've got the impact of light and symbolism of light and dark. And with art, we can make shadow puppets. We could be artistic with light and shade. So a lot of the activities that I'm going to go through, this is one of them. Some of them can cross-link between others. So one might blend itself with another one as well. So the curriculum links are repeated. If we're measuring trees, there's a couple of different ways to measure trees. This is a teacher training I was running out in Egypt, of all places, a number of years ago. But this lady here, you can see my marker. We have a known height of a lady. We can measure the height. This lady is being measured here. Her shadow is being cast. So the length of her shadow is a direct relationship to the height of her. So this gentleman is measuring the height of the shadow. If we know the ratio of the length of the shadow to the person, we know the missing height, which is the height of the tree, based on the ratio. So learning objectives apply mathematics in order to estimate the height of the tree, to develop problem solving and evaluation techniques. There's so many ways you can measure trees. There's 3 methods that we'll just run through quickly here. I'll just demonstrate or highlighted the length of the shadow against a known object. The second way would be, these illustrations are, by the way, from a project I worked on 12 years ago with the Outdoor Education Advisors panel, who created a set of outdoor learning resources called the Environmental Learning Cards. And Will Ridling did all the illustrations. And so these are just taken from one of the cards about how you measure trees there. So basically, the second one, you'd walk away from the tree at intervals and bend over and look through your legs. When you can just see, like here, there's a diagram, you can see when you can see the top of your tree from the arch in your legs. It's at a roughly 45-degree angle. And when we look at a 45-degree angle, the length that you are away is the same as the height of the object that you're looking at. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio. 45 degrees is a brilliant angle to work with. It's very simple. So we can do that, and we can emulate that with that technique. Or we could use a clinometer like we've got here, and we could, again, if we move it away and forward to get that 45-degree angle, then it makes the maths much, much simpler. But again, progression, we could, you could take it up and you could start, but it's at higher levels you start using the trigonometry there. So we could measure different objects around the school. We can compare the growth rates of trees. We can investigate the effect of light and shade on plants. There's lots of extension we can do with that. Curriculum links, estimate heights, measure lengths, calculate the height, the use of a clinometer. We can measure angles. So great links there. Again, with science, we're evaluating a variety of techniques. We can look at a fair test, accuracy, adaptations of animals and plants to light and shade, plant growth, deciduous evergreen trees. We could go into the realms of using a key to identify different species. With geography, Earth rotation again, weather patterns, bringing on the seasons and the shadow length. Literacy, use of technical terms, communicating written skills. And history, we've got the concept of maybe navigation, the use of sextants, the significance of trees in history, through buildings and boats, discovery and collecting exotic species and so on. So there's lots of ways that we can extend and develop the idea of just measuring a tree. Through religion, you can look at maybe ancient tree wisdom, use of symbols and religious and cultural heritage as well, and then artistic displays that we can do there. So this is something that would be much easier to do if we were in a group situation, but another one of these thinking routines is think, pair, share. And it encourages students to think about something and then articulate their thoughts. So I'd like you to think about this image and think about how lichens and moss are affected by light. So just a quick thought, how are lichens, would you think, affected by light? Once the pupils or yourselves would be thinking about that, you'd then pair up with somebody and you'd share your thoughts, share your observations, look for similarities, look for the differences. And then as a group, you could give feedback and sharing, great for assessing learning, assessment for learning and so on. So it's a really useful little tool, a thinking routine, just to engage the group with a concept. So the next activity is actually to do with this, which is looking at lichens and moss. And you don't need anything technical equipment-wise for this, but we're going to investigate the effect of light on lichen and moss growth. So light and shade, we've got different aspects. So you could take one side of a tree, which is in the sunlight, and the dark side of it. You could go to the dark side of a building and the light side of the building and look if there's great amount of moss on one side or the other. Magnifying glasses are useful, recording sheets, identification sheets. There are some good downloadable resources off the internet. The use of a light meter is good. If you don't have a light meter, a camera with an aperture and speed settings are useful. So in dark conditions, the shutter speed is much slower. So you could generate the comparative environmental factor from looking at the speed of shutter. So you're looking for cover on one side and another and trying to set up a hypothesis to see if there's any difference there. Extensions, you might bring in a bit of scientific control, bring in a quadrat, an idea of bringing in a controlled area, look for different trees, see how there's differences between one tree and another tree. Lichens could be used to evaluate air quality. You could bring into aspect then as well. And one little activity which I've enjoyed doing in the past is with groups is an A to Z of words. So you write down A to Z on the sheet of paper and you get groups to work in small groups and get them to come up with a word associated with, say in this situation, plants or living things. And they've got to do it as fast as possible and beat the other team. So it's a bit of fun again, but it's a good kind of review in a way, or a technique for evaluating what they've learned about a topic. So lichens and moss, curriculum links, we will estimate percentage cover, measure abundance or count different species, recording of results, presenting the data into tables and graphs. It's a practical investigation, creating a hypothesis, something we're going to go and test. We're going to classify organisms. We've got lichens and mosses. We can classify them even further, and some identification sheets will do that. We can look at evolution, the use of light meter and scientific equipment. Linking literacy, descriptions, colour, shapes, texture. In geography, we could be mapping areas around the grounds which are light and dark. We could look at air quality maps. We could start to colour in things which are related to light, and bringing in the use of a compass again. Through history, you can look at the Industrial Revolution and air quality, lichens on gravestones, and gravestones again, if we went down that avenue, fantastic for creative writing, as well as looking at lichen growth on those and looking at age of lichens on headstones. Investigating textures with art. microclimate study, there's a whole heap we're going to do. The next series of activities are related to a microclimate study, or at least the climate. So learning objectives to understand how light and shade affect the temperature and climate around school grounds. So you need a thermometer, something to measure high humidity, or hygrometer. And if you've got a map of the school, that's great. If not, well, artistically, we can create a map of the school, lay it out, and ask the students to suggest a list of weather variables, like different types of rain or different types of cloud, or and get them to use descriptive terms like the temperature. Is it icy? Is it cold? Is it hot? Humidity, do you feel damp or dry? You know, what's the environment like in these different areas around the school? Do you get lots of sunlight where you are, shadows, faint shadows, or no shadows? So they can investigate different areas around the grounds and looking at temperature. Extension, you can look at any differences in their results that they recorded. Have a look at seasonal weather patterns. And something I've done a long time ago was a display with a tree, like you see here, a button tree. Each branch would represent a month, and you could use different coloured buttons to represent temperature. So you could have a blue for cold and red for hot, and you could record the temperature on a daily basis and see what happens through the year. And it's a nice pictorial way of artistically displaying temperature results. So recording, tabulating results, we're presenting our findings, calculating areas from maps if we're creating our own map. In the science, we're using equipment, thermometers. We're looking at as well how temperature affects the distribution of species, competition for resources. We could go down the route of adaptation to cold and the seasons and the sun's position, materials for insulation as well. So there's lots of links that we can go with temperature and how temperature makes us feel, and the clothing that we need to wear. So we've got in geography, we could look at climate change. We've got map use there, but we could have a timeline of climates as well, and then the idea of weather and clothing and how we feel. I was involved with the OPAL surveys, the open air laboratory surveys, which have sadly finished now. Their resources were fantastic, and I don't think they're downloadable anymore. The website's down from Imperial College London, but lots of great data that was collected, a citizen science project, and looking at how people felt in different parts of the country. So it's quite interesting how in the south you might not wear as, you know, a big jacket in May, but in the north of England you would be wearing a jacket in the north in May. So that interesting geographical variations. We could look at history, how clothes have changed through time, insulation for homes. And with art, we could look at how people in warm climates use shade in architectural design, or even in their clothing. If we look at wind, a wind is again directly affected by the earth, by uneven heating of the earth's surface. So it's another use of looking at light, and everyone loves playing with bubbles. And we could get students to do a couple of different activities with bubbles here. So there's a bubble chase, which looks at, you have a starting point and you blow a bubble, and that bubble will weave its way and it pops here, and then you blow from here another bubble and it weaves its way over here, and then another bubble blows over to here, and another one comes to here. You do that 8 times and you finish up here, and then you look back at the direction that the wind has come from, even though it's not a straight line, but you can look at the direction, so it's like a bubble chase. You could do a bubble race, and you stand with your back to the wind, you measure a 10-meter stretch, and you get the students to blow bubbles, and you look at the speed or the time it takes for that bubble, or the first bubble, to cross the finishing line. And then you can repeat that, so you can get scientific rigor coming into it. Extension ideas, creating a weather vane, or wind chimes. It would be a nice musical way you can weave that into this activity. How you're feeling, again, it's about us and weather, and how the climate affects us. You could even look at the way the bubbles form different angles, so you can bring some mathematics into that, honeycomb patterns and such like. So, I mean, bubbles are a fantastic resource. They're the thinnest thing that the eye will see, and they reflect the sun's, well, it's the interference that you get that causes the light that we see from a bubble. And bubbles will always go from, they reflect the blues and the greens first, but as they get older, they get thinner and they go through to yellow and then they pop. So they always go through a change of color and then they pop. And it's incredibly thin. It's the thinnest thing that you can see with the naked eye. But the length of time a bubble remains is related to humidity. And so the drier the air, the faster the bubble will pop. So that's quite an interesting way that you could maybe use that into a microclimate study around the school grounds, using bubbles and the duration of the length of the bubble. So, you know, lots of maths involved in that, lots of science. Again, linking with climate and weather, changes of temperature and wind patterns, where you get different afternoon winds in different parts of the world, where you get onshore winds in the afternoon. You can, you know, making bubble art, making honeycomb pattern designs. You could design your own bubble making device, creating natural music through wind. So there's a whole host of ideas there. Again, on the theme of weather and climate, we can look at wind and clouds, and we can use reflection with a piece of plastic or a glass mirror, and to investigate how wind blows the clouds and to illustrate how light is reflected. So again, using a compass, you can mark on a card on the mirror the north and the south. The bottom image there, you basically highlight a mark, say this corner of the cloud, you'd mark on that where that is at any moment of time, and keeping very, very still, that cloud will track across that mirror, and then you'll record its position a moment or however long later, and you get the idea that it's moving in a straight line and it's being blown from a certain direction. So in terms of extension, what makes clouds? We can record contrails from aeroplanes. Do they always appear? Do they always last the same amount of time? It's all to do with the amount of moisture, vapor and humidity in the high atmosphere. We could name different clouds. We could create a wind rose, showing where most of the weather comes from. Is it always in the southeast, or is it generally from the west? And again, that's have to consider the impact on a sunny day and looking at a reflection of the sun's rays. Obviously, health and safety issue there. So looking at direction, plotting findings on a map, inquiry, investigating a fair test, lots and lots of links, as we're you know, trying to demonstrate here on each of these different activities. Lots of poetry about clouds, and young kids, you could look at cloud shapes and find images of animals and things in clouds, and then you can write creative stories about clouds there. Geography, again, Earth's rotation, climate and weather. And then in art, investigate reflective and non-reflective materials. This is a concept of heating water using sun's or solar radiation and reflective materials. So we're going to harness the sun's energy, investigate in renewable energy sources, and trying to understand the principles behind the design of a product to make a really effective, efficient heater. So thermometer, tin foil, cardboard box, a perspex sheet acting as a lid, insulating materials. So very, very simple to make a box, and then developing the idea of different colours that will absorb or not absorb or reflect heat. So in terms of extension, consider thermal insulation types and the kettle design, or low impact and cooling systems. We could research solar cooking recipes. So solar ovens are used around the world effectively for cooking on a very low energy and sustainable system. So that's a great concept to take this idea and move away into other areas there. So we're measuring quantities of fluids, we're recording and presenting our data. We're looking at that light can be reflected and concentrated and absorbed and converted to heat. The use of equipment, and again looking at the volume or the area of that the kettle to see which is an effective, or more efficient system. Looking at history, the history of cooking and fuels. We can look at sun's rays and symbolism of light through religious education, and again very much the design technology, evaluation of materials, energy of the future, and the geography. We look at solar heating and sustainability issues. So the last 2 or 3 activities now, for rubbings, it uses the principles of we're going to explore textures, we're going to illustrate that light can be reflected, and we're going to create a piece of natural art. It's very tactile activity, this. I prefer it to doing a kind of wax rubbing of bark, but this is far more intricate and you can see greater patterns in leaves and things. So it's very simple. Cut up some squares of tin foil, and it's exploring patterns. So in terms of extension, we can try different materials. We could take wax imprints, clay, putty imprints. We could compare it with crayon rubbings, and we could create wall displays. So in terms of maths, we're finding patterns and symmetry, investigating 2- and 3-dimensional objects, looking at living things, adaptations, lights reflected, evolution. We can even look at fossil imprints as well, so we can look at it back through history. Through history, early Buddhist rubbings from the early texts and brass rubbings and how they've been used. We can listen to the sound of the foil through the wind, and so on. Colour palettes is a super simple idea. You put a strip of double-sided sticky tape across a sheet of paper and you ask the students to find objects through shape, colour or texture, and they create a piece of art. And so this theme, you may be able to detect it from red to green. So they would go off and find objects that are various shades from red to green. You could also try here, we've got things from thick to thin, straight to round, sharp to blunt. And this one here is living to dead. So there's an example there. So in terms of extension, why are natural objects changing? Investigating 3D objects and patterns of symmetry. So there's a couple of other ideas there. And again, some fantastic links through investigating and describing patterns, symmetry and shape and objects and so on. Ecosystems, recycling, nutrients, the variety of organisms, classification as well. And there's a book I read not long ago, working with young children, called The Leaf Man, the creative writing about someone who created this leaf person and he went on a journey. So it's very creative, using things like that as well for inspiration. And the final activity is looking at natural lanterns. So light is being shone through translucent objects, and just wonderful to see the impressions of leaves and things. This time of year is perfect. So constructing a little frame, triangular wigwam frame or square frame, gathering fallen leaves, and just have 2 sheets of parchment paper, and you lay your objects between them, you glue them together and you wrap it around, and then you have a light source from inside. So yeah, shadow puppet theatre is a great extension from this. these images for this aren't my own. Most of the other images are my own, but these aren't. So, but it just illustrates again how we can utilize light as a topic, and we can find so many links, cross-curricular links, and we can take it in so many different directions. From history there, the development of lanterns from early candles to modern lamps, design technology, we've got the frames that we're making, materials, the use of lanterns in traditional cultures, like in China, the lantern festivals, and they float them down the rivers, or they'd light them and they're into the atmosphere. So there's a whole host there of activity ideas around the topic of light. Lastly, my final thinking routine, I put this together and just have a thought, just reflect and think, maybe something about this presentation, what you may have thought it was going to be like, or what you may have done already with light and that kind of topic. So I used to think, maybe it's something to do with outdoor learning. I used to think outdoor learning was, I was too many barriers to outdoor learning. I used to think the school grounds were boring. But now I think there's maybe huge potential and opportunity for learning in the school grounds. So there's just another thinking routine that I like to use just to reflect on that learning journey and that learning process. So that's the end of the presentation. It's 20 to 5. I'm gonna.
That's really, really super, Jim. And I mean, I've learned an awful lot from that, and it's just amazing how many subject areas or curriculum links there were from very simple activities, and what you can use, and just being creative in your thinking to one activity can spiral off in so many different areas. And within your lessons, you can encourage, if you do the activity as part of one session, you can relate back to it in other sessions. Well, do you remember when? Which I thought was fantastic, and also the fact that all the activities were so low cost. There wasn't great masses of equipment or yes, a little bit of prep time, but they weren't expensive. They weren't as I said, needing lots of expensive new different equipment. There was lots of them use very similar equipment across the whole range of activities. So that's really, really helpful, and to know that you can do with what you've got around you. And I really like the idea of the thinking routine. Because often when we're starting, you do outdoor learning, and everyone gets very excited and it's getting out and getting started and getting stuck in. For that moment to actually stop and think before you start really will help the pupils and young people to get more out from the session, to think about where they are and what's around them before they then get stuck in. And that point about reflecting afterwards as well, that really will help embed the learning. Is that how you found it, Jim?
Oh yeah, I love it, and I do. I use it with adults as well. I train lots of adults. I teach more adults now than I used to children, but when working with adults or young people, I think it's it just, as I said, it's nice to set the scene, and it brings people into that learning process and that engagement. Yeah,
that's great. We've got a couple of comments here. Thank you, Maria. Maria says she used to think that outdoor learning was just for early years, which is really common. This is what we see a lot. People think it's just early years or just early, your primary school age stages, and it's not for children as they get older. But now you can see that how it's used in upper key stage 2, and I'd say also in key stage 3 and onwards. I mean, some of the concepts that Jim was going through then and where it links to are relevant for key stage 3 and even on key stage 4. So it shouldn't, when we really don't want it, just to be restricted to early years. Love the bubbles activity. Thank you, Lizzie. And the tree measuring. I thought the tree measuring fantastic. I heard people talk about it, and I've never really understood how it was done, how that you're looking through your legs. So really great that people are getting some idea to take away with them. Rupert mentioned, I realise there is more room for lateral thinking in building resources for science. I've been too literal. Well, that's great. Yes, I think this is all what I've seen from Jim. It's all about thinking laterally and widely, that an activity, one which you would say a mathematical measurement activity, it may start off in your mind that way. Jim, you've shown that activity actually can go a multitude of ways. Have you found that teachers, when you worked with schools or with people, they have taken one activity and then use that same activity in a number of different curriculum areas, Jim?
Yeah, and it's interesting how I remember one activity that I came up with. I then gave it I did a teacher training session, and that activity, they used it with their students. So it was teaching the teachers, and in the afternoon they were teaching the students, and then they adapted what they did. And I was like, wow, that's a brilliant way of doing it. And I actually use their way of teaching it now because of it. So yeah, it's very much about, I think it's very much, I like to give ideas, and then I like people to run with those ideas and think how they can fit it with their scenario, what the time frame they've got, or but I do like the idea of having long-term projects which are whole school projects, like the sundial. If you've got so many aspects to do with light just from that one activity. And I've seen examples in schools where you've got a permanent system and they're recording the position of the shadows through the year, and some really interesting things.
Similar to that, I've heard of a tree diary, where children identify a tree either at home or in a park or at school, and they monitor that tree throughout the year, and they record it. They record what the changes that they will take, collect leaves and do rubbings. They'll do poetry, so it extends right from the physical changes, monitoring and observing and recording any growth, any development. I seeing what happens through the seasons, monitoring the tree and seeing, does it lose its leaves? Does it have any fruit? Does it have any berries? Actually taking the time to really look and explore. But then also, I say, the creative writing side can bring in, there's so many different elements. And that was one activity that I know the school had done, which they started in September and it concludes in July, and the children have this wonderful book at the end, which is their tree diary, and it takes them through an entire year, which is that kind of longitudinal study, and that keeping an activity, that sustained activity, that's something isn't over and done within one lesson. I think quite useful for children to see, or young people to see, that things can keep coming back to the same activity.
It's around a topic, isn't it? And that's really lovely.
Yes. Good. Thank you. People having lots of ideas. Yes, we will be sending the PowerPoint round. We've got, I'd say, the session has been recorded, so that will be available for you all to review afterwards, because I know there was an awful lot to take in there. But that's great. If anyone doesn't have, if there's any other questions, just drop them in there. But I think everyone's got an awful lot from that. I appreciate it. It's difficult. It would have been great if we were all together and Jim was there and we could have, gone off and actually done some of these activities ourselves. So, unfortunately, we're not able to do that. But fortunately, it means that more people have been able to join in this session from a multitude of different areas. So I do think that there was something for everyone to take away from that. I too have learned an awful lot, and I'll be passing it on to my children's school with some suggestions of ideas. So thank you very, very much, Jim. I really appreciated that, and I hope everyone got at least a new idea to take away that they're going to put into practice in the coming days or weeks. I've said at the beginning, we have a whole series of webinars during the autumn, so do have a look at our training calendar and book yourself onto another session. They're like this, they're all just people sharing ideas. If you have any ideas, please do let us know. We're always wanting to showcase different people and different environments and what you're doing, because everyone has got something that they can pass on to someone else. And we're all looking and all learning all the time. So thank you again for joining us. And I just want to mention, if you're a member of the Council for Learning Outside the Classroom, you can access these webinars for free. And also we've got a wealth of learning resources that are available for you. And a lot of I do want to say, Jim mentioned the outdoor, the Outdoor Education Advisors Panel education card, activity card, that's it. They are great. Jim was involved in putting those together, and they're a pack of cards that are just activities. So if you're planning, doing your lesson planning, you can just go in and say, oh, this would be great for my next. Oh, there we go. He's showing you. This would be great for my next session. So it takes the stress off you having to reinvent the wheel. They're all there with all the outcomes on the card, all the activities, everything you need to do to actually make that activity work. So really do recommend those. They're really fantastic. Where can you buy the card? We'll send you a link. Emily will send out an email afterwards, and she'll include a link to that. But we've heard such great reviews of those cards. So do, if you're able to, get hold of a set, and it's a fantastic resource for you. And also the national curriculum outside the classroom. What's it called? Outside the classroom. Outdoor. I should have written the title down. It's a series of books by Bloomsbury. The National Curriculum Outdoors. That's what it is. That was recently published earlier in September. There, someone's showing us. Fantastic. Thank you, Rupert. Again, they are for each key stage. There's a different book for each key stage. So you can buy the one which is suitable for you. And as a member of the CLOTC, you can get a discount, 25% discount on those books. And we've had fantastic feedback about those as well. So there's lots of different resources, from free ones that you'll find online to paid for ones which are produced really, really well, that will help you develop your sessions and get the most from it for you and your students. So unless there's anything else, thank you again. Jim, thank you everyone for joining us, and I very much look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon.